And we're going, I think. Okay, kia ora, everybody. I'm Andrew Marshall. I'm the kaiarahi for the Waikato and Bay of Plenty Network of Expertise in Maths. And I'm joined today by Amina Mofassir, who is an early childhood teacher at Mid-City Childcare Centre here in Hamilton. She has a lot of experience in play-based learning, which is what we're hoping to look at today. We want to look at the big picture of play-based learning. And unfortunately, I've probably had all the secondary teachers turn off right now after I said that. But what I'm hoping to suggest is that play-based learning is something that can be part of lifelong learning, right through primary, right through secondary. It doesn't need to stop. Having taught primary and secondary myself, I'd also like to suggest examples as we go along as to how I feel we can incorporate this type of learning for older students. We'll look at a few misconceptions that teachers, parents, and students have about play-based learning, and we'll look at examples from early childhood right through to secondary as to how maths can fit in with it. So I'm going to bring up Amina's slideshow and let her get into it.
So, kia ora katoa, ko Amina taku ingoa. So, thank you, Andrew, for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas and, experiences about a play-based curriculum, and then we'll talk particularly about mathematics, how it is incorporated and embedded in a play-based curriculum. But before we go into, mathematics specifically, we'll just talk a little bit about what play-based is and what play-based isn't. And from there, we'll just carry on to moving on to context, Aotearoa context of early childhood curriculum, which is Te Whāriki in early childhood education. And then I'll explain a little bit about how mathematics is embedded in a holistic curriculum such as Te Whāriki. So start off by, what is play-based learning and why play-based learning? So what play-based learning is basically, it's a credit-based approach that builds on children's interests, strengths, and dispositions. And it's a pedagogical approach to learning where play is seen as the chief vehicle for exploration and learning. And in this type of, learning environment, children have the freedom and they have the ability to move in and out of spaces. So they're not, restricted to sitting at a table or a desk and, on their chairs. So they're able to move in and out of different spaces and according to their interests and needs. And such, environments that are, empowering, where children have the agency to act on their own ideas, they actually help to develop knowledge and skills, that children are interested in and they're wanting to, develop. So I really like what, a lot of research has been done in the recent years and even in the past, last 10, 20 years. Now we have such a big, amount of evidence that has come through neuroscience. We have educational psychology, we have, child psychology, development, of neuroscientific development in young children, and all those fields that are providing us with amazing evidence that, proves that children, learn best through play and through active exploration of their environment, and that children learn through interactions with significant adults and peers in their life, which Vygotsky, he came up with this theory and then his research where he showed that children, they're not as previously thought, that empty vessels that could learn in isolation, and they are actually, active explorer who learn through interacting with other adults in their environment and through other peers in their environment, where they, their learning is scaffolded. And for that, he, really talks about play. And a lot of, other recent researchers have started talking play has come to the forefront as the main way through which children learn. And they say like the skills and the knowledge and, all the dispositions that children need to learn at this stage and for future life, they are all they're able to learn it through play.
And if I'm right here, the research that we're talking about with respect to children's learning is not just early childhood age group. It's not the preschoolers, it's all children. And I would argue again, it's right throughout their life, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. That's a really valid point you've made. It's when we talk about children, like even adults, I would say, when I was thinking, reflecting on when I was making this presentation, I was reflecting at the workshops, some of the professional development workshops I attend. And, when you are in a workshop where they give you practical hands-on activities where you are able to manipulate things and, you are able to have smaller discussion groups and all that, you always remember those workshops because you had so much fun in those workshops, because you could, share your ideas, you could learn from others. And rather than, a conference or a learning, PD that you go to where you have to sit through the 3 hours quietly, trying to soak in. So even for adults, you would see that, it works across, the whole continuum, from starting from, infants to adults to, seniors everywhere around that continent. Yeah. So I really like what Peter Gray, he is a researcher and especially done a lot of, research around development from a evolution perspective and psychology. So he talks about play as he says that play is self-motivated practice of life skills. So all the skills that we need in life, like, curiosity, the skills of, negotiating with the other people, the skills of, learning alongside other people, all those skills, he say that play is the place where children are actually learning these, and they're doing that naturally. So it's a natural way of, learning for children, especially in the early years, but I would say that it goes around, all across all ages.
Yeah, well, that style of learning and activity fits in perfectly with the key competencies of the primary and secondary curriculum.
That's right, and that's what I'll come to the discussion again when I talk about the Fariki, the curriculum that we have now in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for early childhood education, and how that talks about dispositions that you're talking about, key competencies in primary and secondary. They're referred to as key competencies, and they are referred to as dispositional learning in early childhood sector. So definitely that be a wonderful discussion. So now I'll just go to a wonderful research that I have come across, and it's the characteristics of playful learning experiences. So before we go on to, understanding what play-based learning is and what it isn't, there's a continuum where, on one side you have free play, where there's a concept of, no intervention from adults, children doing their own things without any, interruptions from, teachers or other people, adults. And then on the other side of the continuum, you have a very structured kind of teacher-based, pedagogical learning going on, where everything is coming from the teacher, and teacher is supposed to be the source of all knowledge, so didactic kind of concept of learning. And play-based learning sits somewhere in between those, two, where children have their interests, their abilities, their, dispositions that are at the forefront of whatever is happening in that learning. But the kayako, the teacher or the adults, are equally responsible for making that learning experience, come to the forefront. So they are collaborative partners in that kind of learning. So play-based learning falls into that, where the kayako, although they might not be always visible in the forefront, because they will be responsible for setting up the resources, responsible for how you set up the environment, setting up, invitations and provocations for children, which, excites them and incites them to research and, get curious about what is happening. But that's what, play-based learning is. So it's not a passive kind of learning where, children are learning by themselves, but it's basically where children's interest, and the curriculum is built around children's interest and their strengths and their dispositions, but is basically, there's a lot of planning that goes behind. There's a lot of, reflection. There's a lot of assessment, evaluation that goes around to set up those environments. And to, the whole process is like quite complicated. So it's not a passive, process in any way at all. So to think of playful,
one of the misconceptions of a lot of teachers is that they think the play-based activity is like what is happening at playtime at school, where the children can just go and do anything they want at any time.
That's right.
But it's not that at all. It involves the adults and the parents and the teachers there all the time, like you say. And in particular, from my point of view, I think the observation of the teachers during a play-based session is so important.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And that's what they say, like, it's not like the opposite of play is work and the opposite of work is play. So there is no distinction like that. Play is actually work for children. That's how they're learning. That's how they're working. That's how, they're acquiring knowledge about the world around them. So that is actually the way they're learning. So to say that it's something, different, or it's something that happens at a separate time. So that's what it is. It's holistic. It's integrated into children's social and emotional life. So it's, it's embedded in there. So it's not something that can happen separately at a separate time, and then that playtime is over, and then you get back to learning. So learning is embedded in, that play. So that's what I like really, this, what is it called? The kind of diagram that we have in front of it. It's one I've taken from a research that by Zosh et al. And it's 2017. It's a neuroscience that did a review of all the latest research around, neuroscience and play-based learning. And what they have come about is these characteristics of playful learning experiences. And that they talk about that when a playful learning experience has these characteristics, then it's more, meaningful, and it's more productive for children's learning. And they talk about, the first thing that they talk about is joy. And they say that emotions are integral to neural networks responsible for learning. And when somebody, is having fun, you're enjoying an experience, then you have your dopamine levels in your brain that, go high, and they're increased. And with that, you get the enhanced memory, attention, mental shifting, creativity, and motivation. So that's just one neuroscientific point of view where this, framework has come from. So we'll have other, lens to look at, but from a neuroscience, they're talking about that if an activity is joyful, then children, will have more attention. They will be, paying more attention to it. They will retain that, content really well. And then they talk about that the experience playful learning experience should be meaningful. That means it should have connections with what is familiar with something that you're introducing is unfamiliar. Because if you introduce an object or something, a concept that has no meaning for them, that doesn't make any sense to them, it'll be hard for them to retain that. So what that does is, in a neural networks, when you introduce new stimuli linking to the existing mental framework, processing this, the networks in the brain associated with analogical thinking, memory, transfer, metacognition, creative insight, motivation, and reward. So all these links are made. And then it talks about active engagement, that playful learning experiences means minds on and hands on, not just, sitting there. So it should be active, and active doesn't mean that have to be, constantly moving around. But active engagement they talk about is, engaged, even the mind actively engage in an activity. Even if they're sitting at a, desk, an activity should be so, interesting and, engaging that the mind should be active, or even if they're not moving around. So what that does is that it increases brain activation related to agency, decision-making, and flow. And active engagement enhances memory, encoding, and retrieval processes that supports learning. And so that helps to exercise executive control skills, such as, pushing out distractions that benefit short-term and lifetime. So when you're actively engaged in something, you yourself would, even as adults, we say, like, when we are really enjoying an experience and we are actively engaged in doing something, we, our mind actively pushes out all the other things that are happening. We become oblivious of, what's happening around it. Like if you're engaged in reading a book that's really interesting, you somehow, block out all the activity and noise that's happening around you. So the same thing for children to have a playful learning experience that's actively engaging for them. That means that will hold their attention, that will engage them, and will, help them in short-term and lifelong learning. And then they talk about the playful learning experiences being iterative. That means they're able to, repeat them. They're able to come back and practice those things again and again. So with that, it's like they're practicing and have a hypothesis, and they're returning back again and again with different solutions and trying out, different things. So what that does is it helps them to develop different perspectives, flexible thinking, creativity. So that engages all those mental networks that are related to this kind of thinking. And then we have socially interactive. It says like, as previously there were theories around how, children should learn in isolation, sitting in a quiet room and all that. So just opposite to that is the new development that talks about that learning is a social experience. So when, the interactions that are happening between adults or within the children themselves, they help the children from, they interact, promote the plasticity in the brain to help them cope with the challenges. And they are able to, detect the mental state, not just their own, but they are able to, detect the mental states of others, how others are responding, reading their cues, learning from them. So all those things that are really important for teaching and learning, interactions. So they talk about that more of these 5, areas are going to be present in a playful learning experience, the more beneficial and the more productive outcome it's going to have. So I really found that list was really amazing. Like even thinking about, older children, even adults, all these things in any activity, you put them there and you'll see how, engaging and how interesting that would be for them. The person would want to do that themselves rather than being forced to do, So that's what the purpose of, learning should be. It should be fun and it should be engaging. It should be something that children want to do themselves. Yeah.
It's making me think that the title play-based learning could be replaced with a word that was more meaningful to these 5 ideas rather than the word play, for which there are so many, other ideas as to what that means. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah, right. And then we have the next slide where, we come to Thifariki. So Thifariki is the early childhood curriculum for Aotearoa New Zealand early childhood education sector, and it's by Ministry of Education. So it was first introduced in 1996 and has been revised in 2017. So this is such an amazing curriculum. It is one of the first curriculums that was brought in New Zealand and now recognized around the world for, the kind of amazing framework that it holds and how, child-friendly and, caters to the needs of children. So it's such an amazing curriculum that now around the world, other countries are, taking this as their framework and, getting ideas from how to implement that in their environment and in their kind of educational settings. So Thifariki is a bicultural document that incorporates, both bicultural, incorporates bicultural concepts of learning and teaching. And it's a child-based and play-based curriculum that talks about focusing on, skills, knowledge, as well as dispositional learning of children. And then you move on to the framework, the basic framework that it incorporates is, these are the principles and strands. So there are 4 principles of well-being, holistic development, empowerment, belonging, and they're incorporated with the strands, which are contribution, family and community, relationships, communication, exploration. So all these things are really, the core essence of this curriculum. And then we have the outcomes and goals and outcomes that are, a part of this curriculum as well. So, and that's what it is. It's a play-based curriculum that, talks about all these things. So the next slide we have is a quote that I really like. That's from Tifariki. What it talks about, its vision is that, as global citizens in a rapidly changing world, children need to be adaptive, creative, and resilient. And they need to learn how to learn so that they can engage with new contexts, opportunities, and challenges with optimism and resourcefulness. For these reasons, Tifariki emphasizes the development of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and dispositions that support lifelong learning. So it's a holistic curriculum that doesn't talk about content, just learning the content in isolation, but a holistic curriculum that talks about skills, attitude, disposition, along with the content. Everything is a complete part of this curriculum and part of children's learning. So the children are not learning different things in isolation in different periods of the time, but entire day, their entire routines, their entire learning is as such that they are exploring various content, knowledge, and attitudes and disposition throughout that. It's all learning happening, but in a way that normally wouldn't be considered learning in a typical didactic kind of a learning environment.
And I know that more and more primary schools are including play-based learning in their curriculum, in their design of their curriculum, to ease the transition from early childhood through to primary school and onwards. And there's a lot of examples of primary schools and the different ways that they're doing it. Most who are trying play-based learning aren't doing it all day long. They've selected certain times, from what I've seen, to experiment with, if you like, or include play-based learning, to try to make a smoother transition to the different style of learning at primary schools.
Yeah, and that's right. And like I was reading research by Peter Gray, is like one of my favorite researchers and authors. He's a research professor, so he talks about all aspects of human development, that intellectual, linguistic, constructive, social, manual. And he talks about how and these are not limited to just early childhood. These kind of aspects of human development are they go all through human development. So that's what he talks about. These develop through play. And he says that he talks about, particularly in the context of USA, where in the last 60 years there has been steady decline of play, where gradually the impact of learning in a way where school is supposed to be a place where you just leave the play outside and you come and learn. And that what he has been doing research is that it has given increase, it has increased children's depression in children, anxiety in children. And even he talks about suicide rate has multiplied to 6 times in children, when he talks about, and he says, and he has a lot of research which proves that this is because of the decline of play. And he doesn't particularly talk about young children, but children of all ages. And that's what he's trying to do, is to bring play-based learning into secondary and primary, and go through the higher levels as well.
I think more and more of our children are seeing more of their parents doing more and more work, as both parents are encouraged to have full-time jobs and not have much time for recreation. And children are seeing so much of this work all the time, and they feel that at school they're doing work and they've got to do more work, and that they're only going to achieve things if they're doing work. So I can understand children, suffering anxiety, suffering depression because of that constant pressure feel that they're only going to achieve things if they're working all the time.
And that's what has started happening. And lots of other countries, we start seeing this, like USA, UK, even Southeast Asian countries. You see this kind of downward pressure that's coming now in early childhood sector, where you're expecting a 3-year-old child to sit at the table and be writing and reading and be constantly engaged in some kind of what they call learning, and it's that kind of concept of sitting down at the table and rote learning kind of things, where the child should be able to know the numbers and know the letters and alphabets and be able to write. So that is quite visible in lots of countries and stuff, and what it's doing to the children there. you can see all those pressures and stress, that's, boiling down to younger children more and more, often. So it's becoming.
Yep, definitely.
So now we'll look at mathematics in Tifariki. So when I talk about mathematics in Tifariki, and taking this lens of mathematics, but just want to clarify that, in Tifariki, the different areas of curriculum are embedded, and they're holistically, holistically, I would say they're like embedded in the curriculum. So it's not like you have a time where you are going to do mathematics, or an area, specific area designed where the children are going to sit and do mathematics. But mathematics is scattered and it's embedded, and it's placed all around it. But then with that comes a kind of misconception where sometimes you see people, even teachers, who do not have a clear understanding of that, feel that, oh, because it's everywhere, we don't need to actively do anything about mathematics because it's scattered everywhere, and they say it's occurring naturally. So that's the balance that we have to understand, that as Kayako, as the teachers, we have a great responsibility, and have that kind of pedagogical responsibility to understand what this requirement of how we can engage with this particular area of curriculum, and how to embed it in different areas around in a play-based learning. So we'll just talk a little bit about that, specifically mathematics, but in saying so, I'm not minimizing or impact of any other areas of learning where we have like science or all the areas of dispositional learning and stuff, but we'll just use mathematics as an example to explain how one of the areas is embedded. So move on to the next slide, where it says a little bit about importance of early mathematics. So this is all through research, and I've included most of the references. I'm hoping at the end of the slideshow where we have references, so you'll be able to find the references there. Some of them will be there, and some of them I think might be within those references that I've given, or websites you'll be able to find, but it's all based on research. So around mathematics, what the research has shown that most Tamariki acquire basic mathematical knowledge and skills before the age of 8. So that's a research that has come through, and they said the ground is already laid out, before they reach the age of 8. And wide range of everyday activities like play and interest can be used to engage, challenge, and extend children's mathematical knowledge and skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about how these are done, how different interest play activities can be used to incorporate mathematical learning and skill. And then it has to be the importance of hands-on and meaningful and playful learning experiences where children have opportunities to test out, explore, and revisit leads to deeper learning. So they talk about the mathematical learning being hands-on rather than something that's just like abstract ideas being given to children. So they should be, especially at this age, the children need to have to develop concrete ideas before they can move on to developing ideas on which they're going to build on more abstract ideas later on. So they need to have meaningful, and these activities need to be meaningful to the children. It shouldn't be something that doesn't make sense to them, like, oh, today we're going to do this activity, but it has no connection with their life. There has no connection with what they're doing. So it has to be meaningful for them. It should make some connection with maybe their fun or their family life, something that they do in their regular day-to-day life, something in their environment. So it has to be something that they can relate to. And then it should be, again, at the end of the day, it has to be a playful learning experience. It shouldn't be an isolated experience where they are under stress of sitting down and learning or regurgitating facts and figures. So, and then it has to be all about children where they're active explorers. They are the active participants of this learning experience. So they have the opportunity to test out, to explore, to revisit the learning in deeper experiences. So that will help them to deeper learning. Then we talk about mathematics that promotes critical and logical thinking in young children. As we know that mathematics, that's what the basis of mathematics is, that it should lead children to more critical thinking, logical thinking. It should make sense and how they can use logic and all that kind of thinking to develop and, enhance their learning. And then it, research has also found that early mathematics lays foundation for later academic success, that children who have strong foundation at this stage actually do really well later on, because once you have sound, concrete ideas at the base, your building is definitely going to be built on stronger foundations. So that's really, some of the thing, but this is just a tiny bit
and
of,
at that age, if they're meeting all these things, if they're having mathematical learning experiences that are meaningful and playful, they develop a much more positive attitude towards learning in mathematics and anywhere else. But so often the learning in maths gets shut down by children because at some point they have a non-meaningful experience that's not playful, that they don't connect with, and then the attitude that maths has nothing to do with me develops, and it's very hard once the wall starts going up between mathematics learning, it's very hard to reverse that process. So absolutely, all the way
and
along.
And again the onus falls on the teachers, their own just learning and attitudes towards mathematics. So if you have as a Kayakora teacher, you have a positive attitude, you have a playful attitude towards learning mathematics, is something that makes your heart jump with joy, then definitely you're going to pass on that attitude, and you're going to pass on that kind of aspect of learning towards their thinking towards mathematics. So a lot of stuff is like how the children, as teachers, how we convey that kind of our lens of looking at mathematics. If is it fun, is it playful, it's something that we relate to, it's something that can be incorporated, it's important, that's used in everyday life. So that all that follows, and how you as teachers set what kind of experiences you're providing the children, what kind of resources you're using, and how you are engaging in experiences and that episodes of joint attention and sustained shared thinking with children, where you are sharing skills, you're sharing the vocabulary of mathematics and all those things. So
while we're talking about the playful hands-on learning, I've got an example of a very simple activity that could be brought into primary school, secondary school, right up to the top mathematicians. It's basically a problem-solving, hands-on little activities. You'll have seen these little metal puzzles joined together, and you've got to separate them. Now, at first sight, a lot of teachers will say, well, where's the maths in this? But here's what I can do with these, and I've got a range of them. They're similar. Most of them are made up of two pieces of metal joined together. And it's not obvious immediately as to how you separate them, but that is the puzzle. You've got to try to separate the piece of metal. So first up, it's learning problem solving. Now, I would hand these out to students and let them play with them. And this could be in the middle of a maths lesson at secondary school. And you just let them listen to the teacher while they're playing with this. For some students, that'll actually help them to listen. They will be better at listening if their hands are busy. Now, what I would do once they've had a play with these, and maybe some of them have solved it and they've managed to pull them apart, the key that I think brings the richness of playful learning into this is the questioning that I run them through afterwards. I could take aside a student or a group of students once they've been playing with this and say, so how did you solve this? For example, did you just try randomly to maneuver these things until they magically came apart? Or did you have some sort of process? And I'd listen to what their answer was. And for a start, I've introduced the idea of randomness. I said to them, did you just randomly try to maneuver this? And then we can talk about, well, what is randomness? That's actually quite an important concept at higher level maths for students to question and to look deeper into. There's one mathematical idea. Then, like I said, I would ask them, did you actually develop a strategy for maneuvering these? Did you have any system? Could we develop a system? Is there some way even of working out how many different possible ways to arrange the two when they're joined? And can that help us when it comes to finding the solution to pulling these apart? That, of course, is the concept of combinations, counting the number of ways something can be organized. Straight away, that's another fairly high-level mathematical concept, and you could go on to that, having looked at that question with these. Can we categorize these puzzles? They all, the ones that I've got here, are made of two pieces that are actually identical, interlocked. They're identical. They're identical. But in order to know that they're identical, you actually got to look closely. When I first tried these, I thought, well, hang on, is one just a reverse, like a mirror image of the other? And straight away, you've got transformations. And you've got to talk about, well, what would it mean for it to be reversed? And are these reversed? And can we maneuver them so we can tell that they're actually identical or not? And then the question can arise, well, could you make these puzzles out of reversed pieces, not identical pieces? And a whole nother area opens up. I could also talk about how they felt in doing this. Some students will get frustrated. And I was like, did you get frustrated? What happened next once you were frustrated? Did you have any means to cope with your frustration? Did you persevere? To what extent did you persevere? Is that important? And those ideas are real important when it comes to any sort of problem solving. Did you fail? Or did you feel that you failed in trying to pull these apart? All these ideas are so important, and they're meaningful, because you can apply your mindset when you fail at something as simple as this to something bigger in your life, and that becomes more meaningful for any student. That's right. So, and I could go on a bit more about a lot of these ideas and what next, because then students, if they're really taken by this, they could make their own and experiment. Now that they've looked into it, can you make your own puzzles like this? And off they go. But it's just a simple example of how what I believe is very much play-based learning can be at a much older level, and including a lot of high-level mathematical concepts. So I just thought I'd throw that one in there as a
that's amazing. Like, and I'll give some more examples of that, which you're talking about, you know, reasoning and pattern seeking and, you know, problem solving, critical thinking, all these, you know, when we talk about, you know, tools of mathematics a wee bit later, I'll just come around those things as well. So we'll move on to the next slide, where we talk about Tifaraki. So Tifaraki curriculum, you know, talks or recognizes mathematics as one of the many ways of expression required by Tamariki to communicate successfully and widely. So it recognizes that for children to understand that, you know, mathematics is not something that, you know, it's not a content or something, a subject in isolation, but it's something that you use in your daily life to communicate, you know. So like a lot of things, like during, you know, the other day we were, you know, playing with children, and they were talking about, you know, how many, you know, they had cars that were racing down, or they were ticking off like how many I've done. So just putting those in graphs, so just simple graphs of how many blue, you know, socks somebody's wearing today, or how many blue shirts there are children wearing, you know. So simple things in putting down numbers or just drawing lines or graphs, that these are, you know, ways to communicate successfully and widely. So that mathematics is something that's useful, and it's used as a way of communication. And then it's also seen as grounded in the interest, abilities, and purposes and cultural understanding of Tamariki. Like, it's really important to, you know, embed that learning, mathematical learning, because we're talking about in the cultural understanding. So a lot of activities like in our centers would revolve around like what children are doing at home. So baking is one of the things, or cooking something, you know, at home is something where children are actively engaged in their fun, or they see that happening. So when we're doing it at, you know, in a play-based, you know, early childhood sector, we would do that we would have, you know, purposely use, you know, graded kind of utensils, where we're talking about what these numbers, you know, signify, that we have to have 1 cup or 2 cups of, you know, flour and 1 cup of this things. And then you have liquids that are measured in, you know, different volumes, you're using, you know, appropriate vocabulary introducing. So at this stage, it's not important for the children to learn or, you know, be able to say those things, but just being introduced to that kind of vocabulary, introduced to, you know, tools of mathematics, such as, you know, these measuring scales and different things that we use for measuring. It's so important. So that's a fun activity for children who are interested in, baking and cooking and stuff. So they are really engaged. And then they understand we've been doing, ratios around, you need to have correct ratios if you want to get, the outcome to be, really good outcome. For example, when you making Play-Doh for, for our center, we're making every morning, or, every other day we make fresh Play-Doh for the children to play with. So they are engaged in the process of making Play-Doh, measuring out, we need to have the correct ratios of water and flour going in this. So that's the concept of ratios. And even when I was doing been doing some arts with children where we're learning about, to get the correct values, we need to have correct ratios of paints, different paints. So need to have, if you're putting 1 tablespoon of red paint, then we have to have how much of the other paint. So it's, different areas. So it's arts. The children who are interested in art are learning about ratios. They're learning about the same concept, but in a different playful setting that they're interested in. So there are children who are learning, about the ratios, but they're doing it in a way that they're more interested in, like through baking. Then the same thing when, our carpentry area is something that's a lot of children are really interested in. So a lot of, mathematical learning goes on there where children are wanting to make something. So we're using, the different tools, measurement tools, like you have to have, why this is not balancing, so why the angle has to be right, or you have to cut if it has to be, equal, what do you need to do? So introducing them to the tools of, rulers and, measuring scales where they understand, oh, the angles, 45-degree angle is such an important angle in carpentry area where they have to have, the angles cut at the right, place and stuff. So all these things are such meaningful, and they are engaged in these experiences with their children. A lot of children, their parents are really good at carpentry. They have projects going on at home. The same thing with gardening, where we, learning about, how much deeper this thing needs to go and how long these plants have grown. So all these things that are happening are mathematical learning, but they're occurring in meaningful context. So, and they're not, isolated part of the curriculum, but a holistic curriculum where we're talking about like Tinana Titinana, where they have hopscotch games where children are learning to have the numbers. They were recognizing the numbers, but in a playful manner, like, oh, you have to jump on number 1 and you have to clap 1 time, and you have to jump on number 2 and you have to stomp 2 times, and you have to, do so. And they create these games themselves where once they've been introduced to the ideas, the scaffolding, the children scaffolding, where you introduce them to the ideas and then they engage it with themselves and they create their own interest and make it their own. But those concepts are introduced through, playful learning. So the number recognition, how those, numbers make sense and what it means. Like number 2 means if you're clapping 2 times. So they relate that abstract idea of a number to a concrete thing. And the same thing when they go, on a visit to another place, they're counting each other. And then they're making choices, and they're counting like how many children on this side who want to do this activity and how many children on the other side who want to do this. So they're learning about the concept of more and less than, and all those concepts, but they're embedded in something that's meaningful for them. And they realize that, it's something that makes sense. It's something that's important, and it's, they need to learn it because they want to convey something to the others. And that's what it is, that, mathematics is woven throughout the strands of curriculum. So it's not in isolation, but again, I would say that all of that, importance and responsibility is on Kayako, where we talk about intentional teaching, and I'll come more to that a bit later on, the importance of that and how, as teachers, what we do for that. So next we move on to the slide where it just, that's just a few strands where the mathematical learning is made visible in the strands in Tifariki, but it's embedded in all the strand and it's incorporated throughout the principles everywhere. But it's just specifically, these are highlighted, mathematical learning is highlighted specifically in the strand of communication, where it talks about that mathematical learning outcomes relating to the goals of communication, where they have to be familiar with numbers and their uses, and they need to develop skills in using the counting system, the mathematical symbols like numbers, length, weight, volume, shape, and patterns. And then we have the exploration strand, where mathematical learning outcomes relating to the goals of exploration. And they talk about setting and solving problems, looking for patterns like you talked about, looking for patterns. So there are lots of things that children, use for looking for pattern. I'll just give you some examples a wee bit later. And then classifying things for a purpose, why do we need to put them, all of these things go in this basket, or these kind of things go, at the end of the day, they have a basket for lunch boxes, all the lunch boxes go in this basket, and classifying them into the bottles going in the other one, and, classifying then the colored bottles, all the green bottles here. And so they use day-to-day things that are there for them every day, but they use them for a purpose. And then as a teacher, when you can intentionally embed the vocabulary and provide them with a correct kind of skills and knowledge to go with that. And then you have guessing. You talked about estimation, okay, how many steps do you think it'll take for you to jump from here to there, or how many steps do you think this long creation that you have made is. So it's estimation. And then using trial and error. Like these days, some of our children are really interested in having those ramps. They've created ramps out of guttering pipes and stuff, and they're sliding the matchstick cars. And so they've been, we're talking a lot about introducing them the concept of, angles, how, if and they're doing it by their trial and error. Like if I put my, guttering at this angle, the ramp, if is at this angle, the car slides, faster, and this car goes. And then they've been using like measuring tapes and things, different tools to measure how much distance the cars have covered. So in a playful experience, but still a lot of important skills and mathematical learning taking place in that. And then you have like thinking logically and making comparisons, where they're making making sense why this is working and why is the other thing not working, and then making comparisons about that work, and that made it car go faster, or it made it go slower, and why do you think it happened? So intentionally bringing them back to think about, why do you think it worked? Why did that work? Why did this surface not work as well? And what do you think you could do to change it? And how do you think you can make it go faster or further? Or so all those concepts, those are through that. Then Ministry of Education has provided lots of resources and supplementary documents specifically around mathematics, as is with other areas of curriculum. So for mathematics, one of the resources that is designed and I found really quite useful is Teho Tuku Tuku, that's specifically for early mathematics. And it provides teachers with ideas and resources on how to embed mathematics in EC. And they use a framework, Tika Kanu. And it's a wonderful framework that outlines 6 strands of early mathematics that they talk specifically about embedding in early childhood, education. And one of them is the pattern, where the process of exploring, making, using patterns. So we have been using, like, we had a visit last year, I think, a year ago, we went to a marae with children, they were fascinated with the patterns, marae, the patterns on the walls, 455 patterns, and then we had seen some tapasa patterns as well. So they've been like using them, and how, the patterns are repeated and what kind of colors and repetition of shapes. So they've been exploring those and using them to make their own patterns. And then measuring, a lot of, measuring is going on around in Arkadia, these days, where they're measuring everything from their shoes to length of their creations, and, how long and how tall they've grown. So a lot of measuring tools are being used and provided to them. And then we talk about sorting. So again, separating objects into groups of similar characteristics, like even at the end of the day, how these books go back together on this shelf, and what kind of books are going here, and then, what kind of, resources we're putting away, why we're putting them away, and sorting them in simple categories and stuff. So a lot of, talk about those things. Then locating, where children are, finding positional, where they're hiding inside the boxes, or you are on top of the box, you're sliding down, and where is this, your red car is next to this. So all that vocabulary of exploring space or locating, things is used with children in national context. And then counting and grouping, where we talk about numeracy, is just one of, the elements of mathematics. So whereas sometimes it's seen as the major, thing that mathematics, is seen through, is like children knowing the numbers and, counting. But that is, one part of it, where, they know how many they can count, and they can group things, and, make sense about what it means to have that number related to in relation to a quantity. And then we talk about shape. So even like with young children, that's what I was looking at the babies the other day, that how, you know, we talk about children learning through play. So as soon as the children, you know, they start exploring things, it's through, you know, touching, feeling. So different shapes children are exploring. They will picking up the ball by touching, the feeling the ball, you know, how it's rounded, the shape. So that makes sense. So otherwise, you know, if you talk to a child who has never seen or touched a ball, and you told them this is a ball, so that is a really disconnected kind of learning. But when they've experienced these shapes, like they experience these shapes in blocks and Lego blocks, then we have the wooden blocks in our, you know, kindi, you have these mobilo. So they're experiencing all these shapes, and they look at the puzzles, different puzzles where, you know, different shapes fit with each other, and how some, you know, shapes are better to, you know, create something. And they've been, you know, building, like we went to Marai, and then some children wanted to do a project and create, you know, out of, you know, cardboard boxes. And then we looked at how they wanted, like what shape was working. So the triangular or a pyramid shape was much better, you know, supported and easy to stand rather than, you know, so they were trying out all these shapes and, you know, trying to understand what each feature helps to, you know, hold other shapes and what is it in, you know, meaningful in the context of where it is. So so the next we have is the same kind of, that's the diagram that's been used, and it's in from one of the other documents, assessment documents. So they talked about tika kanu, which I really love the concept of tika kanu. So tika kanu, the seed, that's the concept, a metaphor they have used in this, you know, diagram, where they talk about a child as being the seed. And in Maori tradition, you know, tamariki are seen as inherently competent, and they're seen as capable and rich, and they're seen as, you know, completely, you know, complete and gifted, no matter what their age is, no matter what their ability level is. They are seen as, you know, complete seed, so having all those capabilities and stuff. And then you see all these, you know, and all the soil that's around them is the environment, the whānau, the kayako, the teachers, how they nurture and nourish that, you know, seed. Depends on how well you nourish that. That's how it's going to, you know, come out and grow and flourish. So it's the tika kanu is complete in itself, but it's up to us how we, you know, replenish and nourish and take care of it and provide it with the right kind of, you know, soil and care to make sure that it starts its, you know, journey. And when they talk about, you know, a beautiful Hakatauki, where they talk about he pura pura e ruya mai e rangi atia e kore e naru, that a seed sown in a rangi atia will never be lost. So they see children as something that has, you know, descended, come from, you know, places that the children were a valued member of Maori world before conception, before birth, before time. So their journey has begun in rangi atia, and they're born into this world, and they are supposed to be nurtured like precious seeds, you know. So that's a really beautiful concept. What I find is just amazing in Te Maori, you know. And that's the metaphor that has been used here to explain early mathematics, that how, you know, they start using different kinds of mathematical concepts to open on that seed.
And I think that would be a really powerful way to look at all of your students at a primary or even a secondary class, no matter what level that class may be. In front of you, you've got these children, students, all of them have the potential to be as good as anybody in any aspect. And that has to be made aware to the students themselves, the children themselves, as well as the teacher needs to take that on board and realize that all students are actually just as capable as any. Some may take longer, some might take further help in certain areas, but yeah, that's a really powerful way of seeing.
That's amazing. Like they have this Maori health model, Tifare Tapapa, Dr. Mason Dury has presented that, where they talk about, you know, the holistic development of, you know, children, where Titinana, that's physical, Te Hinenaro, cognitive, Tivairua, spiritual, and Tifato, manava, emotional, aspect of human development. And they talk about that all these aspects develop, side by side. It's not like, one learning is taking place at a different time and the other development is taking place. So we're learning, we're growing, the children are growing physically, they're developing emotionally, the cognitive development is taking place. So when we, incorporate learning, it should cater to the needs of the holistic, development of children, and cater to the needs of all these emotional. So playful learning, that's what it does, is looks at holistic development and captures all these, different aspects and incorporates them, in a beautiful way. So these are some of the examples of pictures that I have. The next slide, we're talking about just a few examples. There's so many examples that I'm really, I didn't really have the time to capture all the beautiful learning that takes place, but this is just a snapshot of how these days, like we just introduced, the measuring tape. Kayako was using this measuring tape to, make something, and the children got interested in it. And that's what it is. As Kayako, then you have to be responsible for providing, appropriate resources to make sure you know when to provide those resources and what kind of resources are, appropriate for the children. So you can see the measuring tapes are everywhere these days, and they're working on their creations. And when they have this, I've got this long creation, and then we talk about, okay, how do you make it longer, or how short is the other one, and how, so all these comparative, measurements and stuff. So those tapes are like permanently there, and that's, these days the competition is who gets to make the longer creation and whose is, the highest creation. So that's the one. Then we move on to the other one where we talk about, measuring in natural context, in everyday context, where children are playing in, sandpit, where they are filling up different, buckets and different kind of, we provide them with different shaped containers. So, how much do you need to fill this up, and how many containers of this, if you tip into the other one, how much is it going to take? But it all has to be natural. Learning doesn't have to be enforced in a play-based learning. So it doesn't, as a Kayako, you have to be very cautious about you not interrupting the beautiful learning that's happening through self-play, and still not have that hands-off kind of approach as well, where you feel that I, as a teacher, because it's play-based learning, I can't interrupt. So you have to know when it's the best time to sit with the child, have the dialogical thinking, have co-construct learning, and have those episodes of joint attention, where you're talking about sustained shared thinking, you're learning deeper and taking that learning deeper. But for that, you need to know the appropriate time, how much time that you can see, the child is over this learning and he doesn't want to know anything more about, measuring tape, probably a good time to just put them away for a time. So the best thing is like introduce them to these ideas, and then have those resources available where children are able to use them at, when that interests them, when they're able to, when it's within their access. And once they start, seeing it being used in meaningful way, they use it in, wonderful ways, and they come up with ideas that we never imagined, like, oh, that's the way, this learning could go. And they provide you with, context of learning. So you just get amazed. And then you have baking, where you talked about, how measurement is so important, ratios, proportions, and all that, and science going on there as well. So that's another example of how meaningful, cultural based learning takes place. Then we talk about counting. So this is just one example, but where you can see the numbers relating to something, concrete. So they have different objects, but we usually try to embed it in everyday, activities, like, oh, how many children are here, how many have, everything like they're doing. So counting is, going on throughout the day. And then they have these numbers where they can relate to this quantity, is signified by this number or this numeral. So they're connecting these ideas. And it's amazing to see how naturally, they pick up. I've never seen like a teacher sitting down and asking them to, write number 1, and this is the way it's shaped. They see these numbers, scattered around in the environment in different areas. They see them being used in different areas, in carpentry area, in art area, in, where they're sitting in the social dramatic area, where they, family plays going on, where they have pizzas that are cut into pieces. And we talk about, are you going to eat the whole pizza? Are you going to give me half? Can you give me 1/8 of its portion? So it's like the same thing, but it's, using different resources to incorporate mathematics. And then we talk.
I think it's important to show that counting is meaningful. There's a reason for doing it. I know I see a lot of little children, as soon as they see a number of things, start to count them.
Yeah.
But they don't actually have any reason to count them. It's just an
Exactly.
automatic reflex. They want to start counting them.
Because it's joyful and it's meaningful. So
them only wanting to count when they have a reason to know the number of something or compare or whatever. But we really hooked on that type of rote learning. That's where the rote learning takes off. Even with the alphabet is like that as well.
That's right. The same with the literacy. We just talk about numeracy here, but maybe in future we might have time for literacy and other aspects of with STEAM. We talk about science and engineering and all those subjects, technology, but how they're embedded in play-based learning. And you'll be amazed at what children are teaching at, because the concept of play-based learning is where with the Maori concept of aku, where children and teachers, they both learners as well as teachers. So many children, like, they bring up ideas that because they have seen their parents using those ideas, we go on a native bush day. We have every week we go out for an excursion in the bush. So children working with plants, and they see that, and quite a lot of children have their parents who work in the Ministry of
Department of Conservation.
Department of Conservation, So the way they shared their ideas. The other day we were there, and one of the children, he showed us the plant, like, oh, this plant is a pest, we have to pluck it out because do you see its stem is hollow and it's sucking up all the water. And then we actually pulled out that plant, and he showed us how it was hollow and all the water was stored in that. And then some of those vines that are climbing on the trees, how these need to be removed. And so just being all this amazing concept and context that children, you can't imagine how much they learn when you believe in them, and when you realize that the children are amazing at learning from adults. And it's not just smaller concept, it's amazing big concept that they are capable of grasping. So never limit. It's our imagination and our kind of thinking that limits their learning. But if you leave it to them, they'll just amaze you. You'll be shocked at what we learn. Sometimes we're shocked at And then we have the next slide where we talk about shapes. So one example of exploring shapes through blocks. That's one of the favorite activities that children really engage in and absolutely love playing with. So you can see how they're balancing different shapes, and what shape balance is, and what type of structure do you have to make, and all of this is such a big creation. It's all purposeful, so they have explanation for each, why they put this ramp here and what it means, and why this is good at balancing on top of the other one, and why I tried putting that thing and this, and then we talk about, introduce them to the vocabulary of different shapes, like, oh, cylindrical shape is balancing well on this shape, and your pyramid is able to hold up this shape. So it's really introducing them with, the vocabulary and stuff, but they're amazing at, figuring out that themselves, logical problem solving, critical thinking, and that, divergent thinking that you talked about, how they use all these mathematical, mental, and physical skills to create, their own learning. And then we have the next slide where, another example of positioning where, things are on balancing on top, why some shapes are balancing well on top of each other, and what's next to each other, and what does it have in relation to each other. So is it far from this one, and how close? And so all those, concept, but in natural ways through playful learning, all possible to teach them. And then another example that I saw was like the other day, like this is one of the favorite, activities. So kayako engage in, activities that are meaningful, and they do activities that engage children alongside with them, something that it's natural part of a daily routine. So the children, they come and help you with folding the laundry and getting the laundry in proper place. And this is such an amazing example of pattern seeking and putting things in different shapes and sorting things out. So they were like really careful about, oh no, this shape is this, it goes on this pile, and this shape goes here, and all the triangles go on this side, and all the yellow ones and blue ones. So it's amazing how through simple day-to-day activities they are learning. But it's kayako who introduced those concepts, you know, sporadically and, you know, intentionally we introduce them to that vocabulary. Oh, I can see you're putting them here and what patterns you're making, and look at this pattern. So there's a triangle and rectangle and circle, and then you have again the same pattern. So that's one of the examples of many resources that they use to, you know, do that. Then we have the next slide where, you know, the measurement, now the weighing, you know, they're really enjoying this weighing scale all the time. They're using it. So like, if I put 4 cars in this one and I've put so many here, this has gone heavy. And then we help them to critically think about, why do you think this is happening? What can you do? How can you? So the problem solving, they have to come up with the problem themselves, and then they come up with the solutions themselves, and then trial and error, where they're constantly trying, iterative thinking, you know, they come back, oh no, this didn't work, this made it more heavier, and then they become frustrated. Sometimes it's not balancing, and that's where perseverance and, you know, focus and attention and you know, persisting with activities, that all those dispositional learnings are developing as well, where we're talking about, okay, this didn't work, and you know, I know it can be frustrating sometimes. What do you think we can do? How do you think we can try again? If you're too frustrated, that's okay. We can leave it here. You can come back at another time. Maybe you want to, you know, choose another activity, and then they come back and do those activities, you know, themselves. So it's just amazing how, you know, all that learning is embedded in all that. And then we have just, you know, as Kayako, what we are constantly doing is the process of assessment and planning. So behind this amazing playful learning to take place, I think teachers' role is so important that I keep on, you know, stressing. And it's tragically, early childhood teachers, you know, they're not seen, you know, as teachers, and with the, you know, pay parity and all that stuff that goes on. But if you see how much work and how much learning and, you know, professional development and how much planning and everything, you know, that is happening is, you know, actually like what teachers need to do. So the assessment and planning, where you have this framework where, you know, you notice children's interest, you notice, you know, what they're interested in and dispositions, and then you recognize those interests, and then you respond to them through introducing more resources, through taking their learning to the next level. Like if you keep, you know, if a child is, you know, enjoying something like measuring, and you keep giving them the same resources every day, they're just going to, you know, give up after a few days. So as a Kayako, you have to constantly think about, okay, I've recognized this, you know, the child's interest in this, you know, engagement and interest in this aspect of learning. So how do I respond? What kind of resources do I need to do? What kind of, you know, environment, how do I set up the environment that it challenges the child to just go a bit beyond the level where they will find interest? They'll be more curious to know that, you know, something from that's above their level of what they already know. So scaffolding them, you know, so that their learning keeps on moving to a next level. And then you revisit and, you know, revisit that learning so that it's not isolated one-off learning so that it's lost. So you revisit those concepts and ideas, and then you evaluate like how well that learning went, what have they learned, and, you know, how could we have done that better? So, and then from that evaluation, you again come back to noticing, you know, what's going on. So it's the assessment and planning cycle that's constantly happening, where you are planning and then you're assessing. So that's a really important part of, you know, mathematical learning in isolation. We're not talking about, but just, you know,
a key to that process, I think, is that it's happening all the time. It's not like you're going to set aside a particular day to assess the students on their learning in a play-based way. The teachers are constantly observing, noting down what they see of the different children, because they'll be at different processes, different places on that cycle themselves anyway at any one time. So the teacher is constantly working around that cycle with each students individually. Yeah.
That's definitely, and that's what we talked about. Like I was reading about another, you know, researcher who talks about like why children, you know, lose interest in, you know, play when it becomes, you know, play-based learning concept is put in there, but they don't know how to use it. Is that children, you know, don't like to be judged. They don't like to be, you know, judged by an adult sitting there and marking them. That's when, even as adults, like I remember, like when, you know, teaching practicum and a lecturer comes and sits there with like, every day you've been doing amazing, you know, interactions and having all those amazing learning experiences with children. But when you see somebody sitting there with a pen or a pencil and marking you down for what you did wrong, and, you know, that just takes the fun away from it. And it's the same with the children, you know, when they should know that they are, you know, that mistakes are a part of learning. It's not something that we make mistakes so that we change what we're doing, we improve in a different way, we try something out different. So assessment in early play-based learning is about, and that's what a wonderful framework that we have in early childhood sector is learning stories. So it's a framework where you are capturing the learning through stories, so descriptive way of assessment. So it's not, you're not sitting there and marking them. So it's a way where you're noticing a credit-based, approach where you're noticing their strengths, what are they good at, and how you can respond to that kind of interest, how you can respond to their dispositional learning, that they're really interested in climbing, they're really interested in this aspect of learning. So it's the planning, assessment, and all those tools are specifically catering to the needs of play-based learning curriculum and documents. So everything really responds to it, and that's what makes it a beautiful curriculum. So
Yep. All of the aspects that you talk about and the ideas may have made me stop and think, how much of that have I been doing with secondary students in recent years in teaching maths. And I remember one specific example where I was working with high-level students in the IB curriculum, higher-level maths. I mean, they were working on some problem solving, which was at scholarship level, scholarship calculus level. And there was a group of 5 students. They got on well with each other. There's the first key thing. And I had them work on a problem of their choice together as a group of 5 at the whiteboard without they all had whiteboard markers. They all stood up there and were working on one particular problem.
Right.
And I realize now, in thinking about it, that they were actually playing with ideas.
That's right.
Their play was with ideas. So they would bounce around ideas off each other about how to solve this really hard maths problem. And I just sat there in the background listening. They didn't feel like I was assessing them, but obviously I'm listening to everything that each of them are saying. And that's filing that away, whether I was taking notes on it or remembering. I was able to see, that person's at that point with their ideas, and that person able to apply a lot of their understanding of the content to this problem, and that person hasn't got a clue, for example. I so much just by stepping back, letting them play around with ideas. Admittedly, they were a very intelligent, very capable mathematicians. Therefore, they enjoyed playing with mathematical ideas. Not everyone would, but this is at least one example where I saw these sorts of things happening. And sometimes they would break off into a group of 2, and they would work on one idea and try to run through it on the board, and the other group would carry on brainstorming ideas, and they'd come together and share where they were at. And obviously what I was seeing there is so much from the key competencies of our curriculum taking place in that process. It didn't even matter if I was able to solve the problem or not. In fact, getting the right answer to the problem may not have been the whole goal of the lesson. It could have been more about communicating your ideas verbally, negotiating solutions, knowing which solution to run with and attempt to work it, and so on. So that's just one example that I can see in higher level maths, where a lot of these ideas are actually taking place if the teacher creates that environment for it to happen. A little bit of different thinking.
Yeah, that's what they talk about, like leadership and importance of pedagogical, thinking for that, for these play-based learning to happen. How much you need children, teachers, Kayaku's own knowledge, their own understanding of this concept of what play-based actually means and how to incorporate that, and the narrative assessment, how that takes place, and what kind of lenses to focus on and at what times, and how to cater to the needs of cultural and social and emotional in a holistic manner. So that's really something that's not an easy task at all, but something that's really definitely I think are very lucky to be in New Zealand, where we are prepared really well in universities and our education, early childhood education, especially high level university teaching and learning that prepares us well for this kind of practical stuff. So yeah, really wonderful.
Yeah, excellent. And at the end of this
We've got some references, and I've got some useful resources if anybody wants to look at specifically around mathematics. You know, all these links now, we have all these documents and stuff, they're available online. So anybody who wants to, so specifically the ones that are related to mathematics. But some of these, like in references, some of these, you know, I found the white papers, there are two, that ZOSH one, that's about the learning through play review of the evidence. And there's one that they've done, another paper in neuroscience and learning through play. So I would suggest just, you know, have a look at them, because they've done, you know, a review of, you know, all the research that has come through and how, and it's not just talking about early childhood, but it's generally about how learning takes place through play. And they're given amazing, you know, evidence through different researchers that have come and followed. So I found them really interesting to, you know, read. And I really liked, you know, the book that I had borrowed from you, where Math Research, Playful Learning in an Age of Disruption, where, you know, the authors talk about that mathematical, you know, the mathematics education can and should be playful, joyful, challenging, and meaningful. And that's what they talk about in the context of secondary and, you know, primary level teaching. So that's just amazing, you know, how mathematics can be interesting and, you know, should be interesting, and it should be playful and something that, you know, everybody should be enjoying.
And it needs to be clear to students that there's far more in the world of mathematics than just the content that is taught in schools. It's a very big subject with a deep, rich history as well. So yeah, excellent. All right, well, thank you very much for those ideas, and we will be posting this onto YouTube, onto our YouTube channel, and so we hope that people will actually put some comments down there and tell us what you think, and share some of your stories as well in the comments.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah. So no oruma, so stay well and see you then.
Very good. Thank you.
Turn